Welcome to Christinehof Castle. Christinehof, the beautiful castle that was built by Christina Pieper, the foremost entrepreneur in the Nordic countries in the early half of the 18th century. Christina Pieper, she had this castle built in 1741. Now we are going to step up and visit Christina at her apartment. And the interesting thing is that when Christina had this castle built and it was ready, she was already 68 years old, not a young person anymore. And maybe that's why she made sure that the steps, they are extremely comfortable. Let's try them. I'm standing at the heart of the castle, in the dining room. And I'm standing in the center of the morning star, the star that never goes down. And I think this is what Christina thought about her business empire, that it would never disappear. It is for this woman, Christina Pieper, that we are keeping this castle open. And we, when I say we, it is the Cultural Association Christina's Vänner, the Friends of Christina. And why do we want to be her friend? Because she was such a successful businesswoman in the early half of the 18th century, a role model that we feel we should lift up and speak about. And all our exhibits and activities at the castle is to tell her story and many other women's stories, because we need these stories to understand our history and to be able to develop a future that is for all. Christina Pieper, she was a gambler, but only in business, and she took risks. But she would never allow herself, I think, to sit down at a gambling table like this beautiful one, because to her it was work and work and work. And when she didn't work, she took care of her children and her grandchildren. She was a family person. Christinehof never became Christina Pieper's home. She had already her home at Krageholm, a lovely castle just north of Ystad. So Christinehof was mainly a sort of hotel for Christina, where she could stay when she visited her alum works, and also to greet and receive guests, to dine with them, have business conversations, and when business deals were made. It's not until her son, Carl Fredrik, and her grandson, Carl Gustav, takes over Christinehof, when it becomes more of a pleasure castle, a wonderful place to come in the summertime. And the way we have furnished the castle today in these rooms is more of the style of Carl Gustav's time. I think it's so fascinating just to think that Christina Pieper, she slept in this room. This is where she spent her nights when she was at Christinehof. And you may wonder, why is it all draped in black? Yes, it's because when Christina became a widow, she turned all her bedrooms into black, because she really mourned her husband. called Piper. They had had an equal marriage with lots of respect and I think also love for each other. What was it like to be Christina and to live in that period, in the early 18th century? This is what we always have in mind at Christinehof. We are trying to bring back Christina, and we are trying to bring life to Christinehof, so the visitors, they can feel something. It's not enough for us just to show furniture. Furniture is beautiful, but we want to bring life to the furniture. We want people to feel what it was like living in this castle.
Nej, att få en så jämlik make som Karl var, det kan man inte. Jag själv hade att känna värdigheten sin och
Welcome to the third floor. We are now in a room dedicated to our latest exhibition, Rebel Girls, and especially one of the girls which we tell the story about in the exhibition, Magdalena Rudensköld. Rebel girls in the 18th century. Yes, there were rebel girls even at that time. And Magdalena, who was a great-grandchild to Christina Piper, she was a political activist. She was a lady-in-waiting at the Swedish court. She was a woman who not only was beautiful, but also had the courage to stand up for her beliefs and for the person she loved. And she was punished severely, condemned to death. But the death sentence was instead turned into a prison time for 2 years. She was actually one of the first political prisoners in Stockholm at Långholmen. We who live today, we can actually recognize what these 4 rebel girls went through back then, more than 200 years ago. Because being a woman at that time and being a woman of today, there are similarities. And I think everyone who has in their life felt that my own wishes, my own dreams, all the things I wanted to do, have had its limitations, restrictions that were set by others, and which I had to follow, although I didn't want to. All of us who one or several times in our lives have felt this. We can recognize what happened to the women long time ago. So, what am I? Am I fantastic? Am I naughty? Married? Playful? Am I a person who don't gossip? I think I am fantastic. And that's why I'm gonna put my mush, exactly like Stina Piper did here, in the center of my forehead. And we have our own corona-safe way of doing this. It's a very simplified way of putting a mush in the right place. I put it here with a little bit of lip seal. Now, I'm ready for a party, because this room is also for parties. When Christina Pieper turned 65, she could look back at 15 very profitable years at her alum works. It had become the biggest industry, alum works industry in Scandinavia, and it had made her one of the richest women in Sweden. All due to this alum, the alum crystal. So she decided to build a new castle, and that was Christinehof. I'm walking along the sight line, and this sight line is actually stretching all the way down to the south, where Christina is residing permanently at Krageholm, and to the north, through the forest, where she gets the timber to her alum works. This is her empire. Christinehof was built and ready to live in 1741. But Christina never moved here. She didn't leave Krageholm. Krageholm kept on being her permanent residence. The castle she arrived to in 1720 when she was a widow, and where she died 1752, almost 80 years old. What a lovely way to start your morning, to walk into such a beautiful chapel. And this is what Christina Pieper did each morning. She walked down the aisle like I do now, from her private rooms across the hall into this chapel that she had built. And it was inaugurated in 1723, 3 years after she had moved to Skane from Stockholm. She had this chapel built. There's nothing dark or gloomy about this chapel. It's all white, bright and hopeful. Her Christianity was of a special kind. She was a pietist. And being a pietist to Christina, it meant that she should, as a human being, find her inner discipline, be useful, and make charitable activities, help others. And I also think the Pietism actually allowed her to explore her capacities as a woman, because that special branch of Christianity didn't say anything about that you had to be a man or a woman to act as a real pietist. So this beautiful chapel was built by Nicodemus Tessin the Younger, and he is actually the chief architect for Christina for several of her buildings, and also for the renovation of Krageholm. Although she had all these many palaces and castles and manors to choose from, here in Skane, Kragerholm was her favorite place. And although she built Christinehof much later in life, she kept on having Kragerholm as her permanent residence. And it's not difficult to understand why, because this is a very warm and in many ways a cozy place. And it's privately owned today, and visitors are not, it's not a public place for visitors, so I feel enormously grateful to be here today. It's August and it's time to cut the hedges, and they are 300 years old. Christina Pieper, together with Hans Rammel, she was the foremost builder in Skane at the 18th century. And together with her castles that she had built, she also established beautiful Baroque gardens. And Kragerholm was one of the most beautiful. This labyrinth of a certain kind of beech tree was already planted during her time. Let's move in and see what we can find in the labyrinth. Wow, look at these. They used to be hedges and now their trunks are so big. It's a fantastic labyrinth. And when there was a party, you could hide in the labyrinth, which I'm going to do now. And someone maybe will come and look for me. Ooh. Where are everybody? Ooh. 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 Where is everybody? I'm here. Where are you? Hello. Hello. You know, all this work that had to be done at a castle like this. I just can't imagine how many people who had been working here. It's something special to cut a hedge, a labyrinth that was planted 300 years ago. You feel humble to the people who planted it and all the people who have been taking care of them. So we can still enjoy a labyrinth that is 300 years old. It's fantastic. If we look at this map from Kragerholm, we can see the castle here, and then we have the same as at Christinehof, a sight line starting from the castle, going north and then south to the labyrinth. And this labyrinth was planted in Christina's lifetime. The whole garden was surrounded by arcades of chestnut trees, a tree that became very popular mid-18th century. Our great botanist, Carl Linnaeus, he came to Kragerholm in 1750, and he describes the garden as one of the most beautiful and remarkable Baroque gardens he had ever seen. So Christina Pieper established beautiful Baroque gardens at all her castles. Here I'm standing in the center of the old village that used to belong to Christina Pieper's alum works, Alunbruket. And this is actually the oldest house at Alunbruket. Today a very well visited coffee shop. There are still houses left at Alunbruket that actually dates back to the 18th century. Today they look very picturesque. They weren't that at Christina Pieper's time, for sure. This was a hard life to work at Alunbruket, the alum works. And it's almost unbelievable to think that 900 people lived here. When you compare it with Simrishamn, the village of Simrishamn, and well, it's actually a town, a small town today. But back then it was only 700 people living in Simrishamn. This is the black gold of Andrarum. Black gold it was called because it was worth its weight in gold. This is just the alum shale, but if you process it through a quite complicated process here at the alum works, it will end up in the white crystals called alum. And alum, you can use it, and it can still be used, but especially back in the 18th century, it was used to prepare textiles and fabrics for dyeing. You could use it for your wounds and sores, and so many other useful things. This is what remains of the biggest alum works in Scandinavia. And here is a slag heap. When the alum shale had been burnt in high fires, reaching up to 7 meters, standing here and there, the material, the slag from the fires, was rolled up in wheelbarrows on these steep hills by women and children, not older than 8-9 years old. Can you imagine a wheelbarrow going up this hill? I can hardly walk down the hill. It was an enormous, tiresome work. Christina Pieper's alum works, Alunbruket, with its 900 people living here, was a highly well-organized society. It contained everything. This warehouse was the place where people came to get their salary, not in money, but in goods to eat: rye, barley, corn, pork, herring. As well in Alunbruket, there was also a prison, a school, a hospital that Christina Pieper built to the old elderly women. So this almost overwhelming warehouse was built in 1741. And I can just imagine what it would be like, to come here, with your family. Maybe they were not starving, but it was, tough times to be a worker at the alum works, and to come here and be totally dependent on all the goods that were in this warehouse. And if your so-called salary didn't make it up to all the goods that you wanted and needed for your family, maybe you had a lot of children, you would end up in debt. And most of the people living at Alonbruket, they were in debt to Christina Pieper, which meant that you could never leave the place. Imagine you have been working at the alum works 300 years ago. You have spent your whole life on producing the alum for Christina Pieper. You're old, your health is broken, you've been working 7 days a week. You've never had almost any free time. And now you're old. And you're a widow, no family to take care of you. What would become of you? And this question is something Christina Pieper found an answer to when she had this house built just a year before her own death. She had this house built for 6 to 8 elderly women who have been working at the alum works their whole life, and they could get a final place where they just could take a rest. So then one can ask oneself, why did she build this? If she was only going to use it as a hotel when she visited her alum works. Well, maybe it was important to have a hotel, like a stay over, where you could invite your guests and also stay a week while she was visiting her industry. I also think that she wanted to tell the rest of the world that I belong to this place now. Christina Pieper, when she had Christinehof built, she could stand here along the sightline and say to herself, all of this is mine. From Kragerholm in the south to Traneboda in the north, and with a huge wide circle around Christinehof. I have put my mark on it. I have built a castle. This is my place.